had a hard time sleeping? Me too. But don't worry, we're not alone. Something like a third of all people have or have had problems sleeping. So why don't you come with me out to the casita and I'll tell you all about my personal struggles with insomnia. Well, I didn't always have insomnia. Matter of fact, I used to be an exceptional sleeper. Like, I remember when I used to work nights, coming home at midnight once, and eating a bunch of donut holes and washing them down with black coffee in bed right before going to sleep, and I slept just fine. But unfortunately for me, all of that changed about 12 years ago, back in late 2009, early 2010, when all of a sudden I found myself unable to sleep deeply, or sometimes even to sleep at all. And it was really freaky. Now, I've always been one of those people who needs at least 8 or 9 hours of sleep, preferably 9. And sometimes I would even take a nap in the afternoon. And when I did, it was one of those naps where you zonk out so hard you wake up with marks on your face from the couch cushions or whatever. Oh God, I remember those naps. Anyway, even after I moved to Vegas and started working all kinds of crazy jobs with all kinds of crazy hours, I was still able to sleep pretty well, no matter if I went to bed at midnight, 4 a.m., or even 7 a.m. But then, sometime in early 2010, something happened, and all of a sudden, I was hardly able to sleep at all. And it didn't just start one day out of the blue. It was kind of complicated. So, well, here's how it happened. Okay, so in September of 2009, I had a few nights where I wasn't able to sleep, or I slept very poorly, kind of just dozed fitfully, never really sunk into a deep sleep. But that only lasted a few nights and it went away, and I was fine until the following March 2010, when all of a sudden, insomnia kicked in for real. I mean, I would go to bed and I was able to fall asleep right away, but I would only sleep for a few hours, and then all of a sudden I would wake up and I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep, or if I did, it was into this kind of dozing, fitful, uneasy, half-ass sleep. I mean, I'll get into the particulars of my personal insomnia later, but for now, that's pretty much how it was. Anyway, of course, I totally freaked out because, well, I'm a worrier, and also I've always been a very health-minded person, and I know how important sleep is to your overall general health. So I went straight to the doctor and got some Ambien and went home and looked up online what the best way to treat insomnia was. Basically, there's this technique called cognitive behavioral therapy, where you sort of teach or reteach your brain to associate your bed with sleep only. So you're not supposed to use your bedroom for anything else. You can't read in bed, you can't watch TV in bed. You're only supposed to use your bedroom for sleep and sex. For some reason, they make an exception for sex, which doesn't really make any sense to me, but that's beside the point. Anyway, you're supposed to stay out of the bedroom until it's time to go to bed, and you're supposed to keep the bedroom dark and quiet and cool temperature-wise, and you're not supposed to have any clocks showing, so that way if you wake up in the middle of the night, you won't see what time it is and start freaking out. But you are supposed to set an alarm so that you wake up at the exact same time every morning. I guess that's a super key part of curing yourself from insomnia, is getting up at the same time every morning. Well, at that time, I was living in a bigger house and I had a guest bedroom, so I was able to turn that into my dedicated sleep bunker for the duration of my cognitive behavioral therapy course, because I had read online that if I took Ambien and practiced what they call strict sleep hygiene, I should be able to fix the problem in something like 10 days or 2 weeks. Because I didn't want to be on Ambien for the rest of my life. I mean, I've never been one of those people who likes taking pills or prescription medication at all. And I was especially freaked out by Ambien. Because you know how you read or you see all these stories in the news about people who do all this crazy stuff on Ambien, like get up and sleepwalk or even sleep drive. In fact, I was so worried about it when I was taking the Ambien, I actually tied my ankle to one of the legs of the bed with like a scarf or a piece of rope or something, which I'm sure in retrospect, I probably could have just untied. If I was sleepwalking, I could probably sleep untie. Well, the treatment actually did seem to work at first. After 10 days or 2 weeks or whatever it was, my sleep went back to normal. And I mean, 100% totally back to normal. So I figured I was cured. But wouldn't you know it, a couple weeks after that, I went to a pool party for Cinco de Mayo. And that night, the insomnia came back and never really went away. Okay, so like I was saying earlier, there's all kinds of different insomnias, but my particular insomnia was like this. I would lay down to go to sleep, and I would fall asleep pretty much right away as soon as my head hit the pillow, and I would be out into a deep sleep. But I would wake up after about 2-3 hours. All of a sudden, my brain would just turn on. And it wasn't like I had racing thoughts or I was worried about stuff. I had things going on in my head. My brain was just on. I used to describe it like a television that's just playing static. I mean, there's no show on. The TV itself is just on. Well, that's sort of how it felt with my brain, if that makes any sense. So anyway, once I woke up, well, I would get up and go to the bathroom, which going to the bathroom or having to go to the bathroom wasn't what woke me up in the first place. I just went because I was awake anyway, and I didn't want anything, like any little excuse, like, oh, maybe having to go to the bathroom to get in the way of my being able to fall back asleep, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I would eventually fall back to sleep, but it wouldn't be into a deep or refreshing sleep. It would be into a really light, restless, more of a doze. And a lot of the time I could actually feel myself thinking or worrying about how I wasn't sleeping. Another metaphor I came up with to describe the way it felt was, well, it sort of felt like my brain was a computer hard drive that was skipping. Like, instead of settling down into sleep, my brain got caught in some kind of weird feedback loop and kept skipping and skipping and skipping, and it couldn't get back down into sleep mode. Another way I used to describe it was like being in a swimming pool. Like when I first went to sleep and I sunk down into that nice, deep, dark sleep, well, that was like sinking all the way to the bottom of the pool. And I would stay at the very bottom of the pool until 2-3 hours later, I'd wake up. And yeah, I could sort of fall back asleep, but I could never sink back to the bottom of the pool. I just sort of stayed bobbing at the surface. Well, it was really frustrating and frankly terrifying because, like I said, I've always been a health-minded person, and I'm well aware of how crucial good sleep is for your overall health. And all I could picture was how many wrinkles all this was causing and how my cells were probably all degrading because they weren't getting that nice restorative sleep overnight to repair themselves. Did I also mention I have an overactive imagination? Well, it was also supremely frustrating because, well, unless you're suffering with insomnia yourself, you don't know how maddening it is. Everybody else would just tell me stuff like, oh, you just need to get laid, or oh, you just need to drink a cup of warm milk before bed, or oh, have you tried melatonin? Well, yes, I've tried melatonin, and yes, I've tried drinking milk, and well, as it happens, I was dating a guy at the time that the insomnia kicked in, and well, that kind of broke us up because I was so tired and so freaked out about what was going on with my sleep. He got tired of being around me. I mean, I've always been a very vivacious and fun-loving person, but this whole issue with my sleep kind of destroyed my personality for a couple months because I was so tired and I was obsessing about it. Anyway, like I said, I went to the doctor and he gave me some Ambien, but even that didn't really work for that long. I mean, I needed like a monster dose just to stay asleep for 6-7 hours. I want to say, gosh, it's been a while. I think Ambien comes in 10 milligram capsules and I needed like 1.5. So I didn't really feel like that was safe in the long term. So then he prescribed me a bunch of benzodiazepines. I think I took like lorazepam and temazepam and oh my gosh, I don't even remember them all. But none of them worked for very long. But this antipsychotic drug called Seroquel did work, and I took that for a while, but it had a list of really gnarly potential side effects, so I didn't want to take it for very long, and I quit after, gosh, probably only a few weeks. But I found it ironic that my doctors were willing to prescribe me all these awful benzodiazepines and even an antipsychotic, but they wouldn't prescribe me medical marijuana. This is before we had legalized recreational marijuana in Nevada, but they did have medical marijuana. Well, my doctor, my legitimate doctor, told me he couldn't prescribe that for me, so I had to go to this other doctor. Now, this was 10 years ago, okay? This was kind of the early-ish days of medical marijuana in Nevada. And there used to be these billboards all over town for Dr. Reefer. Dr. Reefer. Well, I had no choice, man. And I wasn't a stoner back then. I really, well, frankly, I kind of looked down on stoners in those days. I kind of thought they were lazy or stupid. And it was really, well, it was embarrassing for me to have to call up a guy named Dr. Reefer and go down to this office, and it was a complete joke. I mean, the guy who, Dr. Reefer himself sounds like he was an interesting person, but unfortunately he was in prison by the time I got around to going in there. So somebody else working for his company wrote me a prescription, and the whole thing was so hokey. That's actually probably a whole nother video. Anyway, I wasn't happy about using marijuana to sleep in the first place. Like I said, I actually kind of looked down on stoners back then, and gosh, I actually remember the first night I decided to try smoking weed when I woke up. You know, I would go to bed, I worked evenings, so I'd go to bed around midnight, 1 a.m., and I would always wake up at like 3 or 4. Well, I remember one time it was 4:20 a.m., and I was sitting in my bed smoking weed and crying, like, I don't want to be smoking dope at 4 o'clock in the morning. I just want to sleep. What's wrong with me? But smoking weed did help relax me enough to where I was generally able to fall back into some sort of sleep. But I still wasn't happy about it. I didn't want to just treat the symptoms of my insomnia. I wanted to get to the cause of all of it. And man, I tried everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Of course, I tried all the herbal stuff like melatonin and valerian root and warm milk. And then I even underwent a course of acupuncture, which was a total waste of time because, well, she stuck me full of needles and she told me to not smoke any marijuana during the course of the acupuncture. Instead, I should take this weird Chinese herbal blend that tasted like ass and didn't do anything for me. And then I even tried going to a chiropractor, which you wouldn't think a chiropractor would have anything to do with sleep, but back in those days I wrote a blog, and so I was blogging about my insomnia, and one of my readers sent me this weird thing about how certain types of chiropractors can supposedly help with sleep, and it's something to do with the spinal fluid running from your brain. I don't know, I was desperate, I would have tried anything. So I went to this quack chiropractor. I mean, this guy was a capital Q quack. I mean, he was very nice, but he had these weird, I don't know, man. Like, he hit me with his little hammer and he put these little copper nodes all over my legs and put me on an inverter and sent me on my way. And, well, guess what? It didn't help either. And then for a while, I tried listening to what's called binaural beats. It's this weird kind of, well, it's not really music, but it's these tones and beats that play at different frequencies in each ear and somehow hypnotize your brain and into going down into delta wave sleep or whatever. And that did sort of help me a little bit, but it didn't really fix the problem. And then, of course, I tried meditating. I even went to a 10-day silent meditation retreat once, where you could do nothing but meditate in total silence for 10 solid days. And that was the worst thing of all, because they went around with a friggin' bell every morning at 4 a.m. to wake you up to go meditate, so I really didn't sleep. But the worst thing I tried was this thing called sleep restriction, like a sleep restriction diet. Basically, you starve your brain of sleep for so long until it gets so desperate for sleep that, well, it sleeps. So basically, you set an awake time. Remember, it's very important to get up at the same time every morning. So you get up at 7 a.m., but you don't let yourself go to bed until 3 a.m. So you only let yourself have this 4-hour window to sleep in. And no matter how tired you are, no matter how sleepy you are, you cannot go to bed until 3 a.m. And then finally, you go to bed at 3 and you have 4 hours to sleep. And, well, you still toss and turn and wake up if you're like me. But you can't, until you can sleep that 4-hour chunk solid, then you can start going to bed 15 minutes earlier. So now you can start going to bed at 2:45. And then once you're able to sleep that 4 hours and 15 minutes solid, then you can move your bedtime back another 15, until you get to whatever the optimal amount of sleep for you is. Well, it was horrible, man. I'm here to tell you, it's so hard to stay awake until 3 a.m. when you're exhausted. I remember it really well. It was a horrible time in my life. I was so tired. I had to do whatever I could to stay awake. Like, if I'm sitting around the house, waiting for 3 a.m., well, I'm gonna fall asleep. So I remember one time I was walking around downtown Vegas, like all the back streets, just trying to stay awake. And I was so tired that I actually fell asleep while I was walking. I'm not kidding, man. I didn't think it was possible either. But I remember as I was walking along with my eyes open, I just kind of like almost fell over. You know, it could have been really dangerous. And you're supposed to do that until you can get to the point where you're sleeping that 4-hour chunk solid. Well, I never even got to that point. I think I did it for, gosh, a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then I gave up. And then another time I tried just staying awake for 24 hours because that's supposed to sort of reset your brain. And that was rough too, man. I went to work. I used to work nights until about 11 p.m., I guess. And then after work, I dawdled and dilly-dallied, and I went home and did some stuff and did this and did that. And then, well, as it started getting later and I started getting sleepier, I went to Walmart and walked around Walmart for like 3 hours just trying to stay awake. Oh, it was horrible. And then I went to a sleep clinic where they stick electrodes all over your head and monitor your sleep. And I went to see a psychiatrist, and I went to see a therapist, but nothing worked. I mean, the only thing I tried in all of this that even kind of worked was this weird treatment that I definitely didn't think was going to work called brain training. Okay, I didn't think it was going to work because on the face of it, it sounded like a total scam. I mean, first of all, I don't even know if it's still a thing, but at the time it was super expensive. I ended up paying $1,700 for, I think it was like a full week's worth of treatments. And basically, with brain training, the theory is that your two hemispheres of your brain have somehow become unbalanced. And so you need to get them rebalanced and in harmony with each other, and then everything will be cool. I mean, they used it to treat everything from like dyslexia to ADD to insomnia. So the way it works is you go into the clinic, or in my case, it was just some random lady, I guess it was like a franchise, which makes it seem even more scammy. Some random woman in Vegas had a franchise, and so she just set up her guest bedroom as this brain training studio. So I would go over to her house every day for a week and sit in this recliner, and she put electrodes all over my head, and then they play, you put headphones on, and it plays these weird tones, different tones in each ear, like boo, 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 boo. And somehow these different tones are like training your brain, or I don't know, rebalancing it. I told you it sounds like the worst kind of pseudoscience bunk, and I don't know, it probably is the worst kind of pseudoscience bunk, but all I can say is it was the only thing I tried that even kind of worked for me. And part of why it worked might have been the fact that, well, going to this treatment and I've always been very frugal, and especially back then, I wasn't making a lot of money, so $1,700 was a big expense for me, so I took it very seriously, and while paying all this money to go sit in a recliner and have no excuse not to fall asleep, well, I dozed off, I think pretty much every afternoon while I was undergoing that brain training. And that was really unusual for me because ever since my insomnia set in, I wasn't able to take naps. It was like my brain would only be able to fall asleep one time in a 24-hour period, and I used that one time when I went to bed at night and got that first 3-hour chunk of sleep. So if I tried to take a nap in the afternoon, even still to this day, I can't take naps in the afternoon. I can really only fall asleep once a day. If I try to doze off in the afternoon, it's a very light, fitful sort of restless doze. But anyway, sitting there at the brain training room in this lady's house, I dozed off, I think, pretty much every day. And, well, maybe that just sort of relaxed me enough to sort of be able to sleep better. I don't know. I did notice another significant side effect from the brain training, and that was that I finally started dreaming again. Okay, that was another weird thing. Since my insomnia set in, I quit dreaming altogether. I had no dreams ever. But after I went through this brain training, brain balancing, I did start dreaming again. I mean, not as much as I used to and not as vividly as I used to, but I do still dream a little. Maybe it's just a psychological thing because I spent so much money on the brain training, but after I finished that, I basically just quit worrying about my insomnia. And I think that's actually the best thing you can do if you're suffering from insomnia is try, and I know it's hard, to stop stressing about it. I mean, my sleep is still not as good as it was before I started my sleep problems back in 2009, but it's much, much better than it was 10 years ago. I mean, I still just like then, I still go to sleep and I fall asleep right away and I sleep for about 3-4 hours and then I wake up, bing, brain's on. But instead of freaking out about it, I just go to the bathroom and then I hit my vaporizer a few times and lay back down, and I'm generally able to fall back into a pretty decent sleep. But that being said, I'm still a pretty fussy sleeper. I'm not the kind of gal that can just crash anywhere willy-nilly. I mean, I have a really hard time sleeping in the same bed with somebody else, and I have to wear a sleep mask, and I have to wear earplugs, and I really like these, I don't know if you can see that, these are those silicone swimmers earplugs because, well, believe me, I've tried all the earplugs there are on the market, and these are the best for sealing out noise. But if I have my earplugs and my mask and at least a semi-private place to lay down, I generally sleep pretty well these days. So if there's anything that you can take from this video, if you're suffering from insomnia, and first of all, I understand and I totally feel your pain. If there's anything you can take from this, it is that, well, it'll probably get better with time if you can just figure out a way to stop stressing about it. Anyway, obviously I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what caused this insomnia in the first place. Because it was so weird the way it set on, you know, like I described earlier. I had a few kind of sleepless nights in September, and then I was fine until the following March, and then it kicked in seriously, and then it went away, and then boom, 2 weeks later, I went to that pool party and had it ever since. So I tried to figure out what I had been doing or what had been going on in my personal life to kind of coincide with that timeline. And I came up with 3 different theories. And you can tell me which one you think is the most likely. Okay, my first theory was LSD. That's right, acid. Okay, like I said earlier, I'm not a big pill popper or pharmaceutical taker, and that extends to recreational drugs too. At that time, especially, I hadn't done really any drugs other than smoke weed. But I went to the Burning Man Festival for the first time in 2009. And one night at Burning Man, me and my sister and the guy that she was dating at the time all took some LSD. And I was super excited because I never had any before. And oh my gosh, you listen to this Timothy Leary and all these psychonauts talking about how mind expanding it is and how it'll alter your consciousness and open all the doors of perception. Well, how could I say no? And I didn't even take a full hit. I just took a half-see. And it was enough because woo-wee, we went out and I had the time of my life. I mean, can you imagine being at Burning Man for the first time on acid for the first time? It was amazing. I had a blast. But then, you know, we stayed out all night. Actually, we stayed up until sunrise. And then after the sun came up, we scuttled back to my trailer like cockroaches and all passed out. Or I should say, they passed out. I laid awake all night, really wired up from the acid, and I wasn't able to sleep that entire night. But it went away after that one night. After that, I was fine and slept fine for the rest of Burning Man. But then I went to another festival. Remember, that was September 2009. I went to another festival the following March 2010 and took acid again, ill-advisedly from a total stranger. As a matter of fact, I don't even know for sure that it was LSD. I'm just assuming it was because it was on a sugar cube, and, well, isn't that how they do acid? Anyway, some dude gave me a sugar cube and I ate it. And again, I had a blast. I ran around all night. Bah, woo-wee! And then my sister and I went back to my trailer to go to sleep, and she passed right out. But I laid there all night, wired and probably grinding my teeth, and it never really went away after that. Well, if you remember, I was able to sort of cure it briefly by using Ambien and cognitive behavioral therapy. But then I went to that pool party on Cinco de Mayo a couple weeks later. And I remember at the pool party, I got in the jacuzzi and I was letting the jacuzzi jets pound on my lower back, you know, like a massage. And then, well, the thought that occurred to me was, oh gosh, maybe I had some kind of residual LSD in my spinal fluid, and the jets from that jacuzzi like pounded it out and it got back into my system, and that's what caused my insomnia again. But when I brought it up to my doctor, and I mean my legitimate doctor, not Dr. Reefer, this is when I still had health insurance and I went to my, you know, the HMO and the real doctor, he totally poo-pooed it. He said there's no way the body metabolizes LSD in 24 hours, and he would know because he was kind of a progressive doctor who had been to Burning Man himself, so I wouldn't be surprised if he had done acid himself, actually. But he said there was no way. And, well, I even tried posting in a couple of drug forums online, you know, those websites where people talk about their drug experiences and all these friggin' psychonauts sit around and... Well, I posted in those forums, and I never really did get any answers, so I guess I just sort of gave up on the idea that LSD was the cause of my insomnia. Okay, but my second theory as to how I might have gotten insomnia was even weirder than LSD. Okay, so at this time, late 2009, early 2010, I was struggling financially. This was the Great Recession. It hit Vegas especially hard. I worked as a souvenir photographer back then, like if you go to a show, and the girl comes around and takes your picture. Well, I did that at Caesar's Palace. And in late 2009, early 2010, not that many people were going to Vegas, not that many people were going to shows, and if they were, they certainly weren't buying $45 souvenir photos. And we only earned commission. We didn't get paid an hourly. So my income had really taken a hit. And to make matters worse, I had just broken up with my longtime boyfriend with whom I had bought a house, and the mortgage was in my name, so when we broke up, well, he took off and left me holding the bag. I kind of talked about this a little bit in my video about when I went on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, so you might remember some of these details, but basically, I bought this house. I was sort of talked into a really bad loan by my ex-boyfriend, but I'm not blaming him. I'm not blaming anyone other than myself because at the end of the day, it was me. I was responsible for my own decisions and I was stupid enough to sign those documents. But that being said, after we broke up and he walked off, well, I was left holding the bag for this horrible mortgage. I mean, it was a bad loan and the monthly payment was $2,600 and I didn't make anywhere near that kind of money. And my personal code of ethics wouldn't allow me to just let the bank foreclose on the house. I felt like I had to go out and, well, make the extra money one way or another. So that's actually how I started nude modeling. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know I worked as an artistic nude model for many years. And that's how I got into it. I needed to make extra money to pay my mortgage. And so I not only did nude modeling, I also did trade shows and conventions, whatever kind of modeling gigs I could find. But all of those gigs had also dried up during the recession. And so the only gigs I could find looking on Craigslist were for fetish modeling. Okay, that's a whole other video because it's bizarre and truly fascinating, but for the purposes of this video and how it relates to my insomnia, well, in September 2009, I started working for this one particular website, which was a breath-holding fetish website. Okay, I'll go into more details about it when I make that fetish modeling vlog, but basically we would just go over and lay there in a bikini and the guy would hook us up to like a pulse oximeter and this machine that had like a readout that would show our blood oxygen level and our heart rate, because I guess the guys that watch that pay to download these videos and watch them enjoy seeing the girl's heart rate get slower and her blood oxygen level get lower. I don't know, I don't judge, and I just needed to make some extra money to pay my mortgage because Jamie Dimon, CEO of Chase Bank, really needed that money. Anyway, all of this was totally voluntary. We weren't tied up or anything, like we didn't have a gag on. We were just laying there in a bikini, and we would put one of those swimmers' nose, those things that swimmers wear that pinch your nose closed so that, you know, the people watching could see that we couldn't breathe, but it was just all voluntary. You would just take a really deep breath, and then the point was just to lay there and hold it as long as you could. But the guy who ran the website had a way of sort of pushing you, prodding you to try and hold your breath even longer. And well, I've always been a very competitive person, so there were many times that I pushed myself past my comfort levels. I mean, he would always go on and on about how there was this other model who could hold her breath for 4 minutes plus, and I mean, even though I was making money either way, like, I'm competitive. I felt like I had to try and beat her. In fact, one time I was able to hold my breath for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Ironically, 4:20. 4 minutes and 20 seconds. And it was such a weird feeling, this rush of euphoria when I finally let the breath out and took fresh oxygen into my lungs. Like, I almost passed out. Well, the guy who ran the website said it was no big deal if I did pass out because nothing would be preventing me from taking another breath. So if I did pass out, it's not like I had anything over my mouth. Swimmer's nose clip notwithstanding. But I didn't have anything over my mouth, so if I passed out, my body would just automatically take another breath and I would come back to in no time without killing any brain cells. So he said. And in fact, according to him, there was this other model who worked for his website. He had a bunch of models, and she could hold her breath until she passed out on a dime all the time. She did it every time she came in, and she was the top seller on the website. Well, I'm competitive, but I'm not that competitive. So after that one time where I almost passed out, I never pushed myself that hard again. I mean, I would generally hold my breath for about 3.5 minutes, and that was long enough for me. But when my insomnia kicked in, it was right around the same time I started shooting for that website. I think I went to Burning Man. I had my little dabble with acid. Then I came home, I started working for that breath holding website, and then that's when I had those first few restless nights of sleep. And I kind of had the idea even back then that it had something to do with the breath holding. Like, it almost felt like my brain was afraid to relax into sleep because then I might not be able to breathe somehow. So I quit working for the breath holding fetish website, but the insomnia persisted. So if it wasn't the breath holding and it wasn't the LSD, well, what else could it have been? Well, at the end of the day, and pardon my language, but at the end of the day, insomnia is basically a mind f***. And I learned that when I went and took that sleep test at the sleep clinic where they stuck the electrodes all over my head and you're supposed to lay and sleep in this little hotel bed they have while they observe you all night. Oh, it's super weird. But I did that, and the whole night I laid in that bed, I felt like, oh gosh, I didn't sleep a wink. But then when they came in and woke me up in the next morning, which they did have to come wake me up, they showed me the graph. Oh, you've been sleeping all night. Well, I felt like I wasn't at all. So, that pretty clearly illustrated that with insomnia, it's all in your head. Or at least with my particular kind of insomnia. I know there are some people who have insomnia that is caused by a medical issue like sleep apnea. And that's part of the reason I went to the sleep clinic, just to make sure sleep apnea wasn't the cause of my insomnia. And guess what? It wasn't. Well, since insomnia is all in your head, I kind of figured that after all these weird theories, it might have just been caused by plain old-fashioned stress. I mean, I was going through a really stressful time in my life. I mean, first of all, when my sleep issues started, I had just started becoming a really outgoing person. Prior to 2009, I really didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't have much of a social life, and I wasn't fulfilled in my job, and so I didn't work until 6 p.m. back then, so I used to just spend all day sleeping a lot of the time. But then in early 2010, I got a job writing for the newspaper. So all of a sudden, I got invited to all these journalist parties and events, and I started going to Burning Man, so all the Burning Man people started inviting me to parties and events, and next thing you know, I had what's called a raging case of FOMO, if you know what that is, FOMO. It stands for fear of missing out. And I had a really bad case. I mean, I would say yes to everything. I hardly stayed home at all. So I was constantly on the go. But at the same time, I was also under a lot of stress because of that mortgage situation I was talking about earlier. My boyfriend broke up and left me holding the bag with this giant mortgage, and I felt obligated to repay it, and I didn't know how I was going to make the money. Well, on top of all that, I had started dating this other guy. It seems like a lot of my problems go back to guys that I was dating. Anyway, I was dating this other guy, and I don't want to disparage him because I'm still friends with him to this day, and he's an exceptional person. He's a really nice, kind, awesome guy. I don't think we were well suited as a couple because he lived out of state. It was a long-distance relationship, and he had pretty bad trust issues. He was pretty jealous. And so, I started working as a nude model, and, well, I guess he I guess he was afraid that I was screwing around with every Tom, Dick, and Harry I did photo shoots with. And then I went to Burning Man, and come to find out the whole time I was at Burning Man, he basically sat around biting his nails, worried about me screwing every guy up on the playa. So much so that he actually booked a plane ticket to come visit me the day after Burning Man. So when I left Burning Man, I had to pack everything up and haul ass straight back to Vegas so I could pick him up at the airport so that he could help me clean out my trailer. And to his credit, he really did. He cleaned out my trailer. He was a great guy. But I don't think that was the only reason he wanted to come visit me right after Burning Man. I think he wanted to, look me in the eye, maybe sniff my panties, see if I'd been screwing around on him. You know what I mean? Well, obviously I hadn't been. So, he helped me clean out my trailer and he went back. But then he showed up again 2 weeks later, surprise, unannounced, for my birthday. And yeah, it was partly for my birthday, but it was also partly so that he could show up at my house without my knowing he was going to be there and bust me in the act of fooling around on him. Well, I wasn't fooling around on him, but I guess the stress and the pressure of this guy constantly being suspicious of me affected me subconsciously because, well, that coincided with those few rough nights of sleep that I had in September 2009. And then I ended up breaking up with this guy altogether the following February, and it was a really bad breakup. I mean, he took it really, really rough, like really rough. And I don't like hurting people, so it was stressful for me too. I'm sure not as stressful as it was for him, but it was stressful for me too. And I think all of that really wore on me, and that was right before the insomnia kicked in for realsies. So I figure my insomnia might have been triggered by, oh gosh, this terrible breakup, this horrible mortgage, and everything else that was going on in my life at that time. But all of that stress did resolve itself eventually. I mean, I broke up with the boyfriend, and I eventually managed to short sell the house and get out of that mortgage. And then eventually I quit saying yes to every party invitation that came my way. But my sleep issues persisted and still do to this day. Although, like I said earlier, I guess I've just figured out a way to live with it. Anyway, I know this is kind of an anticlimactic ending, and if you're suffering from insomnia yourself, well, you're probably pretty disappointed that I didn't come up with some magic bullet or magic cure-all, which I hate to tell you, but there is no such magic bullet or magic cure-all, and anyone who tries to sell you anything that they say is one is full of shit. There is no easy answer. I mean, my friend Terry, the electrician that's staying with me and my sister, helping us with our electrical stuff at the house, well, he's had worse insomnia than me for his entire life. And he finally just sort of got a handle on it by doing that horrible sleep restriction diet that I was talking about earlier that I tried, where you limit your sleep to 4 hours a night and then you increase it by 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. Well, he did that for like 6 weeks and it almost killed him. But he said it did help considerably. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, there's no easy answer to insomnia, but you can learn to live with it or fix it with a little bit of work. And I think it does come down to behavioral stuff more than anything, like, not using your bedroom for anything other than sleep and sex. Although, in my case, it seems like my boyfriends were the cause of all my sleep problems, so I don't know why they would make that exception for sex. Anyway, setting a wake-up time that you stick to every morning, I think that's hugely important. Although I've gotten really sloppy about that myself lately. But that's because my sleep hasn't really been that bad lately. And so, well, I guess I've just gotten lazy. Anyway, even though I don't have some kind of magic answer to cure insomnia, for those of you watching who do suffer from insomnia, well, I hope you found this video at least a little bit helpful. And for the rest of you, you lucky bastards who sleep well, well, I hope you at least found the story of my struggle interesting. Woo! All this talk about insomnia is exhausting. I wish I could go take a nap, but like I said, I'm not able to nap anymore. Instead, I guess I'm just gonna go sit at my desk and get started editing this video.